right, hello everybody, and welcome to Sports Nuts. This is episode 4, December 9, 2024. Getting to the holiday season, boys.
Ooh, almost 2025.
Almost.
Yikes.
Almost. Never thought I'd get there. I'm not there yet, actually.
Yeah, really.
Now that I think about it.
Let's not jinx it.
So I'm Paul Izzo, and I'm joined by my good friend to my left, Mr. Ken Berman.
Hi, Paul. Nice to see you.
And Jim Russo to my right.
Good to be here, Paul.
A different topic for today's Sports Nuts. We're going to talk about the history of Sports Nuts and more generally talk show, sports talk in Boston, because I think we all grew up with the media being centered mostly around the written media.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Jim and I grew up reading the Providence Journal sports section.
Sure.
Good one.
We got the Evening Bulletin late in the evening, and we get the updated West Coast articles.
Yeah.
Correct.
If you're from this area, the Westwood area, Boston area, you grew up reading the Globe, the Herald, or maybe if you're older, the Record American,
Yep.
Yeah, that's right.
the Herald Traveler, going way back, and there was the Quincy Patriot Ledger, the Brockton Enterprise,
Yeah.
just so many great newspapers that had great sports sections.
Yeah.
Worcester Telegram. I mean, they were all over the place. You can think of others. And that sports media has dramatically changed to being more in the sports talk and punditry. First on radio, where it sort of sunk its teeth into all of us. But later, now in television as well, and the cable shows. And they're all over. On NBC Sports Boston, you've got all the Patriot theme shows, the Celtics theme shows. Nesson gives you the Red Sox and Bruins theme shows, the specials, the Inside This and Drive That, and Tom E. Curran and Michael Holley. And
The Game Plan.
And more recently, you have the crossover. You have the guys that go from radio and television.
Yeah.
So we see Mike Felger, who used to be just a radio guy, or he actually was a writer.
Herald writer.
He becomes a sports talk show host, very successful, and then he becomes a TV star to some degree, lesser degree, I would say. So I'd like to take us back to the 80s, which is, I think, when we all first started listening to sports talk. And if you're under a certain age, this may mean nothing to you, and you could just kind of listen, but there was sports talk before Sports Huddle. But that's my first introduction to sports talk.
What was before it? Do you know?
There were individuals that Jerry Williams and other guys that occasionally talked about sports. There was Calling All Sports with Don Gillis.
Right.
If you go way back. But starting around the 80s, I discovered this Sunday night show on WBZ called Sports Huddle. And what was interesting was WBZ was powerful. It still is. It's a 50,000 watt AM station. And when the sun went down, you could hear it all the way into upstate New York, Canada, all the way down to Washington, D.C. So it had a tremendous following. And it was 3 guys. Jim, why don't you tell us a little bit about Sports Huddle going back to the glory days of the 80s?
Well, the host was Eddie Andelman, who's, if he's not the father of Boston's talk radio, I don't know who is.
Should be in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah. Jim McCarthy, who I believe sold insurance. He was not involved in sports.
Yeah.
And Mark Whitkin, who was a lawyer.
Yeah.
And they did a Sunday night show, 3 or 4 hours, and it was great. It was probably the first one I listened to, too.
Yeah.
And it was great, and it was once a week. And Andelman had a certain way of looking at sports that was very humorous. It was not the driven negativity that you have now. It was more just funny, my memory. And it was, I used to listen every Sunday night. I thought it is still one of my 2 favorite all-time sports talk shows. And it was a great, great show. And then Eddie later went on to get a daytime show on his own, still doing Sports Huddle. And then or I had a partner. And then Sports Huddle finally went off the air.
Yeah, Eddie Andelman's interesting because I find him to be one of the best all-time hosts of sports talk ever. He was funny. He was informed. He was up on everything. He took it seriously sometimes, but knew it was just sports. But if we go back a little bit to, I think when WEEI came in at first on an AM station, right? And they were floundering, and they were really not doing well. And they called Eddie Andelman to take over drive time.
Late afternoon
From 2 to 6. And he basically saved that station. Mm-hmm. They would have been out if he didn't agree to do that. And he didn't really, it wasn't like, oh, great, you're asking, he thought about it. Mm-hmm. And he just I thought he did a tremendous job of saving sports talk radio.
Yeah, and going back to the sports huddle, again, if you didn't hear it, it was three fans. There was none of this you stuff.
Right.
That we get with Felger and Maz, which is now Infected Sports Show. It was we. The Patriots were we. The Red Sox were we. The Bruins were we. The Celtics were we. They celebrated victories. They wrote funny songs.
Yeah.
There's Lippett and Tippett and Blackman, the Sackman. The D doesn't play, it attacks.
Yeah.
Where Raymond buries Pats. I still remember that.
Yeah.
They had funny songs about John McNamara, and
Yeah.
they got aggravated when the team did dumb things.
Did.
They got upset, but it wasn't this relentless negative spin on even the best sports stories, which we've gotten over the last 15, 20 years.
And the other thing they did was their opening, which was really funny, which was kind of a precursor to Glenn Ordway's Whiner line, but not as negative. And the opening would always have certain things that were constant, but then they'd add the funny bits. Like one of them was, autograph pictures of Bobby Schmatz going one-on-one with an open net and missing are available with, and they'd add something new. Mm-hmm. And that was really funny. And it, like we both said, it wasn't this overly negativity either. When they lost, they got upset. And they would that was in the midst of the Red Sox haven't won the series since 1918, and Shaughnessy, I think, had coined the term curse. And, I remember the Celtics winning a title on the road, maybe in 84. No, did they win that at home?
They won at home.
Yeah, it must have been 81. Did they?
81 on the road.
Okay, I think
84 and 86.
Yeah,
at
or
home.
maybe it was even earlier, 76. But I remember
That was on the road.
Mark Whitkin saying, that's the blank straight title the Celtics have won on the road. The Red Sox haven't won on the road since, Right. They would say things like that and be funny, and it was very humorous. And let me point out one thing Eddie did. 1986, the Bill Buckner game. That night, Eddie Andelman went on the air after that game and didn't come off till about 4:30 in the morning. Supposedly, I listened to that entire show because obviously I was upset about the loss. And I read after that a psychologist or a psychiatrist said what Eddie did that night was clinical for the fans. I think
he
that's a big
literally
deal.
led people with just the right amount of gallows humor and negativity, and we'll get him next time. He knew exactly what to say to people. People were really in pain.
Oh.
It's hard for this generation to understand
because
that 86 felt, first of all, when we lost Game 6, there was nobody that thought we'd win Game 7. I mean,
Right.
I kept saying, we just have to win one game, but I didn't think we actually would.
Yeah. Right.
And I remember I didn't listen to 4 a.m., but I listened to a good chunk of it, and Eddie was remarkable that night. So Eddie Andelman goes on himself to become a major force in Boston talk show, sports talk show. And at that time, he was really the only game in town.
Yeah.
For most of the 90s. You had Mustard and Johnson, and you had these other guys.
Yeah. Well, Dale Arnold was on the entire time.
Yeah, who filled out the day.
Yeah.
And you had guys at night like Ted Sarandis and these other guys who we can talk about Ted later. But Eddie was really sort of the giant. And it was this mixture of comedy and his wicked Boston accent.
Yeah.
I remember Debbie, my wife, listening to him and saying, that's the most Boston accent I've ever heard. Like I thought I had heard it all because she didn't grow up around here. He really was a dominant figure. I mean, he's still alive.
Yeah, he is, yeah.
But over the years, you began to hear things that he was difficult to work with and he wanted more money. And eventually they kicked him out of drive time.
They did.
and moved him to midday,
Yeah.
where he just kind of, like Douglas MacArthur said, old soldiers never die, they just fade away.
Yeah.
He just kind of faded into the sunset,
Yeah.
and eventually his contract was terminated. But again, if you have access to YouTube, and maybe there's some clip we could drop in of him, but a really major figure, and I think sort of the godfather of what we now call Boston.
But I like what
sports
you
talk
said.
radio.
The three of them together in the sports huddle were fans of sports and Boston sports in particular, which I think we're similar in that way. We're not as funny as him, I guess, but I consider us good fans. Like, we love sports and we love our Boston teams, and that's how we talk about them. But that's what I loved about what they did. They were like fans, and it's morphed into almost like who can be the most
Yeah, well, I think what happened is,
negative.
whether this happened, I think this evolved. And the next big
Well,
evolution...
I wanted to stop. Can I stop you?
No.
Because I don't want to go into the present yet.
I'm not into the present.
Go ahead.
I think this evolved because I think the next, well, pardon the pun, but the big show was the big show. I don't know if that's where you wanted to go, but which is not the present. But I think they were one step removed from Eddie. You guys might know better. Is there a show between Eddie and the big show that achieved that kind of popularity?
Mm-hmm.
Was there? I don't know.
Well, yeah, the big show is obviously, that's when Eddie gets moved to midday. My memory is that Glenn Ordway
Right.
gets pulled out of being a sidekick on the Celtics games
Yeah.
Right.
and gets his own talk show in the afternoon. But before that, we had Sports Nuts.
Oh, yes.
So I want to talk about the evolution of this show a little bit, because maybe our listeners are interested. So in 1991, Jim and I had known each other for 5 or 6 years, and we decided to start a sports talk show on local access television in Sharon. And the idea behind that show, and Jim will give me his take, I'd love to get it, at least for me, was Jim and I and 2 other buddies are going to talk about sports with a little bit more of an analytical bent.
Right.
This is before Bill James was that popular. This is before Billy Ball. This is before
Stats
Stats Inc.
Advanced
And we would come in
stats.
with our own numbers and our own breakdowns and make predictions. And we did the show every week for many, many years. And eventually the other 2 guys dropped out. Jim had to drop out due to work. Ken, you joined in 1993.
Yeah.
And that was sort of the origin of a show which I'm going to say never really took on as a format on the radio. Like, nobody else ever really tried that. I mean, to some degree, you have that now.
I think one person did,
Okay, go.
and it was only in Providence, and that was Chuck Wilson.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know how much data he used, but Chuck Wilson was, for me, another sports show that I wanted to hear, and not for the same reason as the Sports Huddle, because it was very fan and game oriented. It was about the games. It wasn't about, we're going to whack this guy and we're going to whack that guy, and it was very intelligent sports talk.
You had a lot of guests, too.
He had a lot of good guests,
Yeah.
and he was, to me, an excellent host who probably couldn't thrive today. And but I think that was the one other show. That
Yeah,
was
the
doing
other one
something
that-
like that.
I'm sorry. Yeah,
No,
the
go
other one
ahead.
that comes to mind is Bob Newmeyer, who,
Yeah.
when he was on midday, was
the best they had.
pretty good in terms of looking at things a little bit more objectively with a little bit more numbers. He came prepared. His
Always.
problem was he wanted too much money, and they didn't
Yeah.
renew his
Yeah,
contract.
I agree with that about Newmeyer. He was excellent.
So,
Excellent.
and I think we've sort of morphed over the years, because everybody now has access to stats and you can look everything up, into more just sort of looking at things as knowledgeable fans, for lack of a better way of looking at it, although we do come in with some things of our own. But that's sort of, I remember. Now, one of you guys want to get back to the big show on WEEI? Because that's
Yeah,
late
go
90s, 2000s.
I mean, how do you just, I mean, that was a good show. I liked that show. I thought that's when Ordway was actually on his game. We know the guy who put it together pretty well, Jason Wolf, a good friend of mine. I got to meet that whole crew, taking photos at their the Whiny Awards, whatever they call them, the Whiner Awards. Every year they had a banquet. And I'd go to it. But that sort of started that. The Whiner line was at first just call up and complain about what you didn't like about your team, and it sort of morphed into how funny can you try to make it.
So what was the Whiner line?
Yeah.
The Whiner line was part of the show. Well, you could call in at any time during the show and
Basically record a voice message
of what you wanted to whine about. Because, Woodway said we were, plus we were losing at the time, I think, right? Weren't they losing a lot still?
Yeah.
And it was, you could just call in and voice your displeasure on your Boston teams. And then they would edit it together and play, I don't know how long it was, I forget.
4 or 5 minutes.
4 or 5 minutes.
The
They
Wiener
play
Wine
all those
line.
clips. Yeah, they'd play those clips.
And as Bob Bryan once pointed out, I think it was Bob Bryan, that's the most popular part of the show.
Yeah.
Even though they had an entertaining show.
Yeah.
Well, I read once back then that attorneys in their law offices between 10 minutes of 6 and 6 would stop what they were doing, turn on the radio,
Listen to the
Whiner line, and then at 6 o'clock go back to work.
Yeah.
Because it was just funny.
It got funny. It started out as like really bringing your misery and your hate.
But that led to an award show based on who whined the best.
Yeah, who whined the best.
And the thing about the Big Show, which I liked, was it was Glenn, and the guy, producer or whatever he was Pete Shepard. But they'd have guests on that, for a specific topic. Like Fred Smirlis and Steve DiAsi became the football guys in this area because of their appearances together on the Big Show, which was usually Mondays after a Pats game. Sean McAdam, who had started, I believe, at the Providence Journal, I don't know if it was his very first job, but made his name there before he left, was a very astute baseball commentator, very astute.
He's still around.
And he's still around, right. And he would come on sometimes with Tony Maserati, who was not like he is now, which we'll talk about that show in a minute. But they would give you some really good baseball stuff in the midst of all the humor. So I thought in its prime, that was a very good show. And there were other guests, too, for, they had, I don't know who they used to bring on for basketball. I can't remember. But they would have.
Well, it might have been Bob Ryan.
Yes, it could have been Bob Ryan.
Jackie McMullen was on a lot.
Jackie McMullen.
Yeah, she was on a lot.
Yes. So
and they were great.
In their prime, I think that was a very good show.
Yeah. I think what happened to the Big Show, and this is very cliche, is it got too big for its britches.
Yep, it did.
And I thought that Fred Smirlis and Steve DiAsi were on too much. They were talking about things other than football. They weren't that witty. And I think tastes changed.
Yeah.
And when teams started winning, people were looking for something different, and that gets us to Felger and Maz.
Well, can we now? Can I interrupt you on that?
Yeah.
Thank you. Meanwhile, while the Big Show was going on, in my opinion, the single greatest sports talk show was going on in New York. Eventually on WFAN, which is Mike and the Mad Dog. For those of us who got a little tired of the Big Show and wanted something different, I would go, I would go grab a sandwich for lunch, make sure that I would have lunch later. I would sit in the parking lot and tune in WFAN, which they went on from 1 to 6, 5 hours.
5 hours.
In my opinion, to this day, Russo is, you used the Lennon-McCartney analogy. He's an excellent host on Sirius. I'm sorry.
Great show.
Mike and the Mad Dog was better. You had the perfect combination of entertainment with Chris Mad Dog Russo and the perfect sports guy who's taken a lot of heat in his later years, but in Mike Francesa, who knew all the sports, gave definitive opinions, not always right. They were fantastic. So that was an alternative to the Big Show, if you chose, which I did.
What Mike and the Mad Dog did better than anybody in Boston has ever even tried to do is navigate that fine line between being in New York, being New York-based, with so many stories, the Knicks, the Nets, the Yankees, the Mets, the Giants, the Jets, so much, and yet talk about national sports.
Right.
Yeah.
Nobody in Boston has ever tried that.
Right.
No.
They have convinced themselves that there's no audience to hear about. There was a really interesting game last night, the Eagles versus the Ravens, on December 1st, or 2 weeks ago. Nobody's going to talk about that in Boston.
No, dog will lead with it today.
That's what they'll talk about.
Yeah.
People don't talk about the NBA Cup games that don't involve the Celtics. They don't talk about the World Series hardly at all when the Red Sox
Would you always
aren't
tell
in
me
it.
about that Seattle show that you liked?
Well, back in the early 2000s, I used to spend a lot of time in Seattle on business, and they had a show that's not there anymore called The Morning Schnoz, and he just went right through all the sports, 10-minute segments. Let's go to baseball. Let's go to football. And I thought it was a great idea. Never translated. Nobody ever tried it in Boston.
No.
Because Boston talk show hosts have convinced themselves there's no market for it.
Yeah.
And I disagree with that more than ever because of gambling and fantasy sports.
Yeah. Now the other thing about Mike and the Mad Dog, which I've never heard in Boston, is the chemistry between the two of them. And they fought a lot in real life.
Yeah.
Not fist fights, but the chemistry was phenomenal. Yeah. And as Don Imus once said, you can listen to them talk about anything. And I don't know if on 9/11, Don Imus was asked to stay on the air. He used to do a 6 to 10 show on the Fan. He stayed on till 1 o'clock. They turned it over to Mike and the Mad Dog, and they did an excellent job. Mm-hmm. They really did, because they can talk about anything together. Mm-hmm. And to this day, when they did something with Stephen A. Smith recently, you can see it. And they used to do just skits like, okay, Mike, what are the Eagles-Cowboys game ratings? Just ratings. Dog, I think that's like 8.7. Close, 10.8. Even that, it's so inconsequential. But listening to those two guys do that was entertaining.
Yeah.
Dog's Super Bowl quiz, but, back to Boston. They were so extraordinary, I just felt they had to be mentioned.
So while this is the difference between a memoir and an autobiography. We were talking about this the other day. Autobiography has to be accurate.
Yeah, right.
Memoir is what I remember. What I remember is that as the Big Show began to fade, other stations dipped their toe.
Yeah.
There was the 1510 experiment.
Right.
There was the Sean McDonough experiment. There was bringing back guys and trying different things. And then they brought this writer, Michael Felger, on to 1510, I think it was.
Michael Felger used to appear on The Big Show.
Okay.
Yeah, he
That's
was a
where
guest
he
on
really
the Big
got
Show.
it. And sometimes I'll never forget when Nomar didn't play that game against the Yankees in 04 and Jeter went into the stands. Felger and McAdam had a big argument about that.
Yeah.
So he started on The Big Show.
Yeah, but he got his first show, I think, on 1510, that ESPN channel that only lasted like a day.
Yeah.
It was barely on.
Yeah, he got a show from being a guest on the Big Show to doing that on AM, which didn't last.
And it's our inside baseball understanding that certain people at WEEI wanted to bring Felger in there, but were overruled.
Right.
On that decision.
That was when Ordway's contract was up.
Yep.
And he was holding out. And the parent company really wanted to bring him back, and somebody else wanted to replace him with Felger, but didn't get his way. So I can leave it at that. Besides that, I can't say anything else. But so then I think it's 15 years now. Didn't 98.5 just celebrate 15 years?
Did they?
Yeah.
I believe they did.
But there were some other things that happened that this is, again, memoir.
Yeah.
Remember Jay Severin?
Yeah.
Okay. So Jay Severin was this sort of conservative, loud talk show host. I actually died a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Not old. Who was hugely popular on 98.5 temporarily for a period of like 5 years. My memory is he was dominant. And I think that sort of sold people on the idea of FM talk.
Yeah.
Because I don't remember there being a lot of big-time FM talk before Jay Severin.
I don't either.
I don't remember quite the circumstance of him leaving. It might have probably was some controversy because he was always getting himself in trouble, especially in Boston because he didn't, he wasn't liberal. wasn't progressive. But then at that point, 98.5 decides to, at some point, dive into the world of sports.
Sports talk
and that's where we
show.
get Felger and Maz,
Yeah.
which is probably what we'll talk about now.
Okay.
Two sports writers that cut their teeth at the Herald. You and I got to know Maz a little bit through some charity work that we did. Great guy,
He
down
was
to earth,
tremendous.
willing to help.
Couldn't be
But
nicer.
they soon figured out that, it's funny. Rick Pitino said talk show was the fellowship of the miserable. People had reason to be miserable back then.
Yeah.
In the 90s, the Bruins hadn't won in 20 years. The Red Sox had never won. The Celtics hadn't won in 10 years.
Yeah.
The Patriots were a laughingstock.
Yeah.
And I think that they picked up on that, which was, we're going to be in your face, negative, call the teams you to distance ourselves from them.
Yep.
They coined that
You fans.
terminology. Oh, well, if you said the Celtics, he would say you, as if to imply I'm on the team.
Yeah.
And it worked.
Yeah,
It's worked. And, one of the
number one by far.
Number one by far. It's worked. I think a separate question is whether it's good radio. I know that if they were here, if they were listening, they would say, we're number one in the ratings. To which I say, okay, that means Beverly Hillbillies was the best TV show in the 1960s.
Right.
Because it was consistently number one in the ratings. I don't want to hear about Dick Van Dyke.
Right.
Beverly Hillbillies was number one.
Right.
That means Disco Duck was the best song of the late 70s because it was number one.
Right.
Not Crosby, Stills, Nash, not Zeppelin, not...
Right.
Yeah, let me say a few things about them individually.
I think it's a separate question whether it's good radio.
Yeah, but as to how it evolved, in my opinion, whether you like the show or not, and we can talk about that, Michael Felger is the single most influential person in Boston sports media since I don't know when, maybe Eddie.
Yep.
He is more influential than any writer. He is more influential than any broadcaster. And the reason I say that is a couple of things. Number one, I think one of the reasons Michael Felger's show succeeded this time was Michael Felger went on TV. Okay? He is the first talk show host to really go on TV as a personality. So when he would go on whatever NBC Sports Compass is now, it used to be something else.
Sports Channel.
Sports, whatever it was.
Yeah.
You would watch him, and people would want more of him because he had a good personality. They would then listen to the radio show. That's number one. Another reason he's influential is before him, everyone was like, we do this show. What do you think, Paul? Ken, what do you think? He was. Izzo. I don't think so. Berman. Russo. Last name first.
Right.
He was then. Everybody does that now.
Yeah.
Forsberg.
Right.
What were your impressions of the first half, Forsberg?
The you thing is caught on.
I was just going to say that. The you. He'd be like, you can't beat Buffalo in Buffalo. Well, Mike, I did not play in that game, but it caught on. 4 is what Paul said, which is the unbelievable negativity, which I agree they wouldn't give two hoots about. They wouldn't give two hoots about because it works for them. But I mean, I don't listen anymore, but you guys were telling me they're knocking Drake May. I did accidentally hear a bit about the Celtics recently where he was, the Celtics now think they're the Patriots. The Patriots were always the Patriots way. That's why they won. The Celtics think they're winning because they shoot so many threes. I think they can win another way. I think it's ridiculous. And I'm like, when did they ever say that?
No one said that.
No one has
No one's
ever
ever
said that.
They have a style, and it's working for them.
Yeah, that's it. Joe Mazzulla has never claimed. They asked him about Mazzulla ball the other night. He said, I don't know what that means. And Abby asked him again. But the second person I want to talk about is Maz. Okay. Maz was a very good baseball writer. First for the Herald and then for the Globe.
Yep.
Smart, could really make baseball points. And when he did some analysis last year for Nesson, he kind of reverted to that. And you could see that he has great baseball knowledge again.
Oh, yeah.
He keeps track of minor leaguers.
Yeah,
that's his sport.
he knows his stuff. And I look at the contrast between Tony Maserati and Sean McAdam. They used to appear on the Big Show together. Mm-hmm. When Maz went, and it was good baseball discussion, I enjoyed it. When Maz went to Felger, you look at their careers parallel since then. Sean McAdam, I don't know who he works for, but he was doing color for a Cape Cod League game this year. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but he's not in the prime Boston sports media like he was in the Big Show era. And I think because he never made that decision to go wicked negative. If you listen to Sean McAdam talk baseball today, he still knows his stuff. Yep. He really does. Maz, on the other hand, to me, made a conscious decision when he hooked up with Felger. I have no personal knowledge of this. I'm going to double down on Felger. I'm going to go with him. I'm going to be negative.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to be negative. And Maz has a style where in hour one, he will say, you know, Celtics really didn't look good last night. They made key mistakes. Joe Mazzulla coached a terrible game. Hour two, Mazzulla was unbelievably bad last night. Hour three, Mazzulla was just awful. I cannot believe that movie. To hour four, and it works.
Yep.
It's not my type of sports show, but it works for a lot of people.
Yeah, it does. And keeping the callers very, very short.
Oh, yeah, that works.
The callers are not part of the show. No. They claim it drives the content. It doesn't. If anybody has anything really kind of complicated to say, they're not really that interested.
And it works because Glenn Ordway, maybe you remember, when they first came on, he was like, oh, another show to challenge us. I can't remember the exact wording.
Oh, yeah, they
really
weren't afraid of him at all.
They weren't afraid. Grace Slick once said, rock and roll, each generation should make their parents angry, or something like that.
Yeah.
Michael Felger outdid the Big Show.
He did.
He was more negative, more pile on than the Big Show, and he knocked them down.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ken.
Well, I was just thinking, like, the question to me comes to, like, do you enjoy listening to sports talk radio as much as you used to? Do you like where it's at or not like where it's at? It's sort of infected almost every show. You know, they've sort of got that format into so many shows that you turn on, and when all it is negative, they've made that the genre. Mm-hmm. A lot of times it's
I think the shows are trying to do what Felger did to the Big Show, and what Grace Slick said. Each generation has to be more to make the parent. I think we've seen it. Kurt Minahan tried to outdo Felger.
Right.
This was going to be the next big star for EEI. It didn't work.
Didn't work.
Adam Jones, what does he call himself? The Prince of Darkness?
Yeah.
He tried to do, so far no one has been able to knock him off.
They've already
his
moved
perch.
him from drive time to
no one's been able to knock him off
midday,
his
and he'll be
perch.
gone when his contract's up.
I think there's a danger. Don't ask me for specific examples. I listen to Felger and Maz more frequently than you guys do, mostly because I'm driving back and forth.
When I have short drives and he's on,
I have long drives. And look, it's the only game in town, really. I'm not going to listen to Adam Jones or any of these other people.
Right.
So you put on Felger and Maz, and I say to myself, okay, leaving aside the fact that the negativity is not my cup of tea, what else don't I like about it? I think it's getting a little stale. I do. I think that they need to be careful about being too cynical. Murray portrays himself. He's a good third banana. He's funny. He has he interjects witty things.
Doesn't like anybody.
Murray's not 25 years old. No. That's his. He acts like he's this young guy that knows all the all this stuff. I think there's a risk for them. If somebody was going to topple them, it would be a young guy.
Yeah. Who
taps in, because I got to believe Felger and Maz's audience skews relatively old. Mm-hmm. I mean, is a 22-year-old going to listen to them? I'm just not sure.
I don't think so.
But look, if they were to watch this, they would say, you guys are idiots. We're all making a fortune.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a separate question is whether it's good radio.
Yeah.
Getting back to Felger's conscious negativity, and I think even Felger would get a kick out of this. One of the Super Bowls that we were all together to watch, as soon as the Patriots came back to win, we said, let's turn on the post-game show on Sports Channel to see Felger be miserable, and he was miserable.
Oh, he hated every time they
He
won
had,
a
he
Super
literally
Bowl.
had a grimace
Yeah.
and found negative ways. They were lucky to win, or they shouldn't have even been close.
Well, I think
or-
what happened there
and
was that was the Malcolm Butler interception Super Bowl, and he was all geared up to trash them because it looked like they'd lose. He had Ty Law and Troy Brown on that show, who were former Patriots fans. And when they came back, Michael Felger immediately wanted to talk about, and they wouldn't let him. They kind of overrode him. He was miserable the whole show, as Paul said.
And
Yeah.
then, but Patriots got him off their post-game show after that year when he was miserable after winning the Super Bowl, hosting a Boston sports talk show.
Well, I can't say that I remember specifically the timing of him leaving that, but yeah, he's not on it anymore.
No, he's not on
I
it.
mean, the relationship between the Celtics and the Patriots in 98.5 is very interesting because those guys pull no punches. They make up stories. They'll tell you that there's infighting in Foxborough that nobody's reporting. No, I read the Globe. I read the Herald. Where's this coming from? They make it up, or they get one scintilla of a report from Twitter,
And they turn it
into a story. But again, it works for them. It's
does.
just not for me.
I think that's the least favorite part. Like, I heard them say, I don't know how many times in the end of the Belichick era, I heard them say, I know exactly what Bill's thinking. I know how he thinks. Oh, that's why he did this. He's doing this to rub it into so-and-so. And I'm like, you know he's thinking that? Like, when you start telling me you know how someone's thinking, then I'm like, okay, I can't do that.
Yeah, or I want to know where's that reporting coming from.
Yeah.
And, go ahead.
Let's talk about, too, with Felger and Maz, the coincidence of them going to this, over, a lot of negativity at a time when the Patriots are forming a dynasty. So how do you do that? They mastered it. They would pick, like you said, maybe they found something, or maybe they'd just pick on a little thing and blow it up like Maz is.
Well, the cheating angle.
Helped them because they found ways in this amazing period of Patriots dominance to do this. The second thing with them is their rise, which I think they have contributed to, as it coincided with the Patriots' rise, is football's got to dominate. And to me, that turned me off completely. I don't care what time of the year it is, we're going to talk football. Maybe in the summer, Sox, we might talk some. But did the schedule come out today? Did this come out today? And they don't feel they can talk about it. Now, when they do talk basketball, I personally don't feel they're as knowledgeable as they are when they talk football or Maz talks baseball. I don't think they're very good talking basketball, but it became this overwhelming football show. And I think to this day they would say what you said earlier. You guys are idiots. That's what people want.
Yeah, football
we
dominates.
certainly are idiots.
I
I'll
love
agree
in the
with that.
summertime when the Red Sox are playing the Patriots not, they go, all right, and that was our Red Sox minute. Because Maz does the hour show after he does the baseball show an hour after that. So during the regular 4-hour show, okay, that was our baseball minute.
Now, if you are not into the Felger Maz thing and you're a basketball fan, there is an alternative, which I don't know what they do in the ratings, but is kind of an old-time show with new time, which is the starting lineup on NBA radio, which is Frank Isola, who's been a New York sports guy for years, and our own Brian Scalabrine. Heaven forbid, but they actually talk about the games.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is a new concept, or an old one, where a sports talk show will talk about sports games. They will run down. Last night, Donovan Mitchell got red hot. They ran down the Utah play at the end last night. If you like the games like I do, and people that know about it, I listen to them in the morning. But if they came here, my opinion is Felger would destroy them in the ratings.
Most likely.
Yeah. But, I mean, what does eventually these guys get knocked off their perch one way or the other, and I wonder what it will be. I always think, and we've talked about this, but you and I actually talked about this a lot. Somebody who's really a good radio guy that brings some humor and like an Imus type of show, but in the sports genre, would be, to me, what would knock them off. Combining, actually talking about games, and maybe not just the Boston ones, or maybe just the Boston ones, but someone who's a real radio personality.
Yeah, well, radio's no different than any other business. First to market is very important. So to have a good, high-quality, well-put-together FM sports talk show in a world where people increasingly don't use their AM radio was a stroke of genius. It wasn't a fly-by-night station like 1510 that no one even knows how to get it.
Right.
Even the old WEEI, what was that, 550 or 590? Or
590
and then it was
AM,
850.
Yeah,
You know,
then
it
it was
moved around the
850
dial,
AM.
and no one. So WEEI is sort of chasing that,
Yeah.
the FM format. The other advantage Felger and Maz have is they have pretty good lead-in shows. I would say Beetle and Zoe is a good midday show, and the morning show.
They kill the ratings too. in
The
that
morning
time
show
slot.
is good. So being first to market, being
Yeah.
on FM makes it tough. I'm going to talk about Drew Carter for a minute.
Can I answer Ken's point?
Well,
before you talk
I'm
about
answering.
Oh, all right. Okay.
I'm going to address
Yep.
that. If you hear the way they talk about Drew Carter, where they're very anti-Drew Carter because he says funny things and he acts a little bit silly and he has funny nicknames,
Acts young.
that's a bit of a tell. You know, to me, when I heard Felger and Maz saying that, and I happen to like Drew Carter, I was thinking to myself, wow, that sounds like old fuddy-duddy. You know, you need to be careful there.
Yeah.
Because when you start saying that the 25-year-old sounds goofy or whatever, that starts to sound like that guy shakes his hips too much, and it's 1956.
Right.
And
Yeah, I agree.
yeah,
And
that's
Drew Carter's great.
Yeah, you got to be careful there.
Yeah.
You got to be careful there.
I agree.
I think what's going to possibly not is a combination of what you two were talking about. One, I think it will be a young guy who knows about TikTok, who knows modern culture, who knows things like that.
Exactly.
With a great personality. But I also think if you look at TikTok, if you look at what young people do on TikTok, it goes back to Grace Slick. Someone is going to outrageous Felger as he did to the Big Show. Probably a young person who knows these modern things and, isn't talking about the Beatles, is talking about Taylor Swift or the latest rapper or somebody like that, like Drew Carter does. He knows modern culture. I think he's great. I think he's been a breath of fresh air for Celtics telecasts.
Yep.
And I'm saying that as a 65-year-old. I think
Yeah.
he's great. And I also think it goes back to the Mike and Mad Dog chemistry. He has chemistry with Scal.
Yeah. They do.
Scal said in an article by Chad Finn that he auditioned with 12 guys. As soon as he did with Drew, he knew that was the one. I think maybe knock them off is two guys who have chemistry, modern chemistry, like they do for broadcast. But know the modern things and modern. Maybe that knocks them off.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting subject.
Yeah.
And, here we are back on doing our old show.
Yeah.
We talked about sports talk show hosts back in the 90s. I remember we had special shows talking about all the different hosts, and here we are 30 years later. So any last words on this, boys? I'm going to wrap it up.
My favorite radio show of all time, Imus in the Morning.
Oh, I love Dimas. And I do like the fact today with Sirius, I do like the fact with Sports Talk Radio, that if your deal is Felger and Maz, which a lot of people's are, and again, I think Michael Felger is the most influential personality in Boston sports media since I don't know who, then you can listen to them. But now with Sirius, people like me who might want a different thing, I get to listen to Isola and Scal in the morning, and maybe there's a comparable football show on their NFL radio network.
Mad Dog in the afternoon.
I can listen to Mad Dog in the afternoon and actually get it clearly. But I imagine for us, fans whose chief sport is football or hockey, there's probably a comparable show there on Sirius. So I like the fact we get choices.
So if you enjoyed this episode of Sports Nuts or any other episode of Boston Sports Nuts, send us your comments, send us your emails, send us your money.
No.
Why not money?
Okay. Money. No. No.
We'll see you next time. Happy holidays, everybody.
Yes.
Happy holidays.
Thank you for watching Boston Sports Nuts. You can find all of our episodes available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. For more information, go to westwoodmediacenter.tv or follow Boston Sports Nuts on Facebook, Instagram, and X.